Hey guys, it's Miss Miklos. I just wanted to make a short graphing video that's going to highlight some of the stuff that we talked about in class last week. The first thing I want to talk about is just some basic graphing. So I wrote out the equation here, y equals 3x squared minus 2x plus 5. So remember, whenever I want to graph a function, over here I have a picture of what your calculator looks like. I'm going to start with using the y equals button. So I'm going to type y equals, and this screen is going to pop up. So I would type in 3x. Whenever we use x, we use that xt theta n button. That just represents a variable. So 3x squared minus, notice minus is different than the negative symbol, so minus 2x plus 5. So that's how we get that equation. Now, we have this button called zoom, and we talked about in class how if I press zoom 6, it will give me a 10 by 10 graph. So that's what I did here. I pressed zoom 6, and it gave me a 10 by 10 graph, and I can see that my function is up here. So if we look at that graph, we notice that everything on that graph is up high. So let's say I wanted to change the way I was looking at the graph. I'm going to press this middle button, which is zoom, and this is the screen that comes up, and it gives me options to zoom in, zoom out, and then zoom standard is the one we've been using a lot. So I'm going to choose zoom in. Let's say I want to get a better picture of what this function looks like up close. So I'm going to choose option 2. And this is the screen that should pop up. Now it will give me an ordered pair, and that's telling me where my cursor is. So I can move the cursor, and with the cursors, those are just the arrows that go up, down, right, left. I can move them wherever I want. So in this case, I just moved it straight up, and my cursor right here is at 0 and then 4.8387. Then I press the enter button on my calculator, and now my graph just shows a zoomed in picture of what this function looks like. So it definitely looks a little bit different than our original function did. And this is important for us to remember, that the screen on our calculator is just like a snapshot of what the graph looks like. We know the graph continues. Even though we don't see arrows here, we know it continues up in both directions, and it continues to the right and to the left. I went ahead and pressed zoom 6 again, and then I pressed the window button, and the window button is right next to y equals, and when I press window, this is what comes up. And what window does, let's say I didn't want to zoom in or zoom out, I just wanted to specifically look at some x values or y values. So I can change the x min, the x max, the y min, and the y max. So I decided that on this graph, nothing was below the x-axis, so I really didn't care about all the negative y values down here. So I kept my x values the same, and I went ahead and changed my y values. So I just moved the arrows and typed and cleared out negative 10 and 10. I changed negative 10 to 0, and I changed 10 to 15. Now this graph shows me a window of 0 to 15. So if we graph something and part of the function is not being shown on the graph, we can always adjust the window in order to see a better picture of what the graph actually looks like. Now I want to talk about finding relative extrema, and this really means relative mins and maxes. And we worked on this last chapter, but I'm not sure how many of you guys took it that seriously, so it is always a good review. This time I decided to graph a different function, so once again I pressed y equals, and I typed in negative x squared plus 2x plus 5. I pressed zoom 6, and it gave me this 10 by 10 graph. Now if I look at this, I can tell that we have a relative extrema, and that means that I have a point, in this case, it's higher here and it's going lower in both directions. We might also see a point that looks like this, where the point down here, it's rising in both directions. We call a graph like this, it has a minimum value, and it is a relative minimum. This we call a relative maximum. So in this case, I want to find a maximum, so I'm going to press second trace. Okay, when I press second trace, we're going to be using this function a lot. It brings up this screen that says calculate. And there's my minimum and my maximum. Just so you know, the way we find mins and maxes are exactly the same. It's just important that I choose the correct one here. We decided this is a max because it's going down in both directions, so I'm going to choose number 4. As soon as I choose that, it's going to ask me left bound, and my cursor is now actually on the function. And whenever the cursor is being moved around, you guys will notice that we have an ordered pair down here. So it's telling me that right now it's on 0, 5. And I need to decide, is this point to the left of where I think this function, where this function's maximum point is? So I think that is to the left. Anything on this side would be to the left. So I can press enter anywhere on this side. As soon as I press enter, now it's going to ask me right bound. And I want to pick a point that is to the right of my maximum. So any of the points over here, I'm going to move the cursor to the right. And it's helpful when it says left, normally we move our cursor to the left. When it says right, we move our cursor to the right. So right bound, I'm going to choose any of these points and press enter. Then it's going to ask me for a guess. Now my guess, I can try and get close to where the maximum is, but the important thing is that I am between my left bound that I chose first and my right bound that I chose second. I can press enter on any point between those, and that'll be my guess. As soon as I press enter, your calculator will give you the maximum value. Now, the maximum values might change slightly, like here I got 1.0000006. If I chose something a little bit different, I might get 0.99999. And even though those look different, we really know that the maximum value is just 1. So our answer here would just be 1/6 as our maximum value. Now, sometimes on our calculator, when we're dealing with the ordered pairs, we'll get something that looks kind of strange, and it might say like e-7, okay, like 2e to the -7, 2e -7, things like that. This -7, it is just like scientific notation. So this really is saying the same thing as times 10 to the -7th power. So I know that if I have a value here, I would need to move the decimal point over 7 times. So my answer is actually very equivalent to 0. Next thing I want to talk about is the concept of finding a 0, and we talked about this in our last class. So once again, I want to get to this calculate menu, the same menu we went to for min and max. I am going to choose option number 2, 0. And we talked in class about the fact that the reason why we call this a 0 is because it is when the y value is equal to 0. So we call these the x-intercepts. So when I choose 0, this is the screen that's going to come up. And if I look at my graph, I can see that it crosses the x-axis in 2 places. So 1, 2. Both of these have an x value we are unsure of, and the y value is equal to 0. So it's going to ask me left bound. It does not matter which 0 you try and find first. We just need to pick one and find that value. So I'm going to choose to find this one first. So in order to choose a point to the left of this 0 is going to be anything on this line, because those are all the x values that are to the left of where that 0 is. So once I move my cursor to the left of the 0, I'm going to press enter. Then it's going to ask me right bound. I'm going to choose anything that is to the right of the 0. So anything in this area right here, and I'm going to press enter. Then it's going to ask me to put a guess, and I'm going to put a guess in that is close to where I think it crosses the x-axis. Now sometimes when we put a guess in, we're going to get this symbol, and it says error, no sign change. And I just want to quickly explain that. What that means is that you chose 2 points that were either both to the left or both to the right. The reason why it says no sign change is because if I look at values to the left here, they have negative y values because they're below the x-axis. Points up here have positive y values because they're above the y-axis. So no sign change means you chose 2 y values that were negative or 2 that were positive. Okay, if I chose correctly and I picked left bound here, right bound here, it tells me my 0 is negative 1.44949. Now I need to find the second 0. So I'm going to go ahead and use the same method, and so I would press second trace, choose 0 again, and it's going to ask me left bound. This time my 0 is right here, so anything to the left would be in this area. I would press enter. Right bound would be anything in this area. Okay, so this time that is to the right of where I think my 0 is, so I'm going to press enter. And then once again, it's going to ask me for my guess, so I'm going to move my cursor close to where I think the answer is, and then it will tell me where my 0 is. On your assignment number 2, you guys have a ton of these problems. I'm letting you know for what we're learning later in this chapter. If you guys understand how to find zeros on your calculator, it will save you a lot of time. So even after watching this video, if you're solving a tough time, you definitely need to come in and get help from your teacher. The final thing I want to talk about is the trace function. So if you guys look at those 5 graphing buttons, trace is up here. So if we look at trace, what trace does, it'll just show a blinking cursor somewhere on our function. It tells us what the function is up here, and then the cursor is going to be at whatever this ordered pair is. So there's 2 different things we can do with this. We can move the cursors left and right, and it will just show me all those solutions, because we know a graph is a visual representation of the solutions of a function. Or I can actually choose an x value, because we know x is the independent variable, which means I can control it. So if I press 3 and press enter, it will give me an answer that y is equal to 2. In fact, I can choose any domain that is on my screen. So here, my screen goes from -10 to 10. So I chose 10. Now 10, -75 is not on this graph, but it tells me that is a solution. So just like we learned previously, if I wanted to change my window and actually see where 10, -75 is, I might change the y minimum to be like -80 or something like that, and then I would be able to see this point. So I just want you guys to know you don't have to freak out if you don't see the cursor on your screen. Rely on this ordered pair to tell you where the cursor actually is at. So this was just a really quick reminder on things we've learned in class. Hopefully it's helpful. And once again, if you need help on anything, please come in. Okay, I will see you later.